I was staring at 3 orange traffic cones blocking my driveway when I realized the Homeowners Association had finally crossed a line they couldn't uncross. My name is Travis Whitmore, and I'd lived in Meadowbrook Heights, a planned community in suburban Phoenix, Arizona, for exactly 4 months when this nightmare began. The cones sat there like little plastic soldiers, perfectly spaced across the entrance to my property. A laminated notice dangled from the center cone, swaying slightly in the dry desert breeze. I got out of my truck, already feeling the frustration building in my chest. The notice read, "Violation. Unauthorized driveway use during community beautification project. Contact HOA immediately." I hadn't authorized any beautification project. Nobody had asked me about blocking my driveway. I pulled out my phone and dialed the HOA office number listed on the notice. Meadowbrook Heights HOA, this is Karen Everhart speaking. The voice on the other end was chipper, almost aggressively pleasant. "Hi, this is Travis Whitmore from 4187 Desert Willow Drive. There are cones blocking my driveway, and I need to get my truck in." "Oh yes, Mr. Whitmore. We sent out notices 2 weeks ago about the concrete repair project. All residents were informed that driveways would be temporarily inaccessible." "I never got any notice," I said, keeping my voice level, "and I need to park my truck. I have equipment in here for work tomorrow." "Well, the notices were sent. Perhaps you should check your mail more regularly. The cones will remain until Thursday." It was Monday afternoon. That's 3 days. Where am I supposed to park? "Street parking is available 2 blocks over on Sagaro Lane. Have a blessed day, Mr. Whitmore." She hung up before I could respond. I stood there in the Arizona heat, looking at those 3 cones, then at my driveway, which appeared completely fine. No cracks, no damage, nothing that needed repair. I walked around to my backyard and checked the property line. Everything looked normal. This was bizarre. The house next door belonged to an older gentleman named Frank, who'd lived in Meadowbrook Heights since the development was built 12 years ago. I found him watering his small garden of succulents. "Frank, did you get a notice about driveway repairs?" He looked up, adjusting his sun hat. "Nope, my driveway's clear." "Why?" I pointed toward my front yard. "They blocked mine with cones, said there was a beautification project." Frank's expression darkened. "Let me guess, Karen Everhart? How'd you know? She's the HOA president, and she's got a particular way of doing things. Had a run-in with her myself about 6 months back. She tried to fine me for having the wrong shade of beige on my mailbox." He turned off his hose. "Travis, can I give you some advice? Whatever battle you're about to fight, make sure you know all your cards first. Karen doesn't play fair." I thanked him and went inside. The house was still mostly boxes and furniture I hadn't arranged yet. I'd bought the place in a hurry, relocating from Seattle for work. The job at a civil engineering firm had seemed perfect, and Meadowbrook Heights looked like a nice, quiet community. The HOA fees were reasonable, the neighborhood was clean, and the houses were modern. I should have known it was too good to be true. That night, I dug through my filing cabinet until I found the closing documents from when I'd purchased the house. The stack of papers was thick, full of disclosures and agreements. I started reading through everything, including the HOA covenants and restrictions. Most of it was standard stuff about lawn maintenance, exterior paint colors, and quiet hours. Then I found something interesting in the original development documents. My grandfather had been a real estate attorney, and he taught me to always read the fine print. This particular document was dated from 2013, when the development was first planned. It outlined the land purchase and subdivision process. What caught my attention was a separate addendum, something that had been attached to my specific deed, but not mentioned in the standard HOA documents. It referenced a concrete easement agreement. I had to read it 3 times to understand what it meant. Apparently, when Meadowbrook Heights was developed, the original land had belonged to a concrete supply company. That company had sold the land to the development corporation, but retained certain rights. Specifically, they retained ownership of the concrete foundations and driveways for a period of 20 years, essentially leasing them back to the development. It was an unusual arrangement, probably done to reduce the initial development costs. The concrete company was Whitmore Concrete Solutions. My father's company. I sat back in my chair, processing this information. My dad had died 8 years ago and the company had been dissolved. But according to the documents in front of me, the rights to the concrete foundations hadn't expired. They'd been transferred to his estate, which meant they'd been transferred to me as his sole heir. I needed to verify this. The next morning, I called my father's old attorney, Gerald Morrison, who'd handled the estate. Gerald was semi-retired now but still kept office hours 2 days a week in Scottsdale. "Travis, good to hear from you. What can I do for you?" I explained what I'd found in the development documents. Gerald was quiet for a moment. "You know, I remember that agreement. Your father was quite proud of it. He structured the deal that way to maintain some leverage with the development company. There were concerns about payment schedules, so he kept technical ownership of the concrete work. It was supposed to be a formality. So it's real. I actually own the concrete foundations. If the 20-year term hasn't expired, then yes, those rights would have transferred to you. Let me pull the file. Can you come by tomorrow?" I made an appointment for Wednesday morning. In the meantime, I had to deal with the cones still blocking my driveway. I'd parked on Seguero Lane the night before, hauling my equipment 2 blocks to my house. It was inconvenient and absurd. Tuesday morning, I went to the HOA office in person. It was located in a small building near the community center, decorated with the kind of aggressive Southwest aesthetic that screamed designer who'd never actually lived in Arizona. Lots of turquoise and cactus imagery. Karen Everhart sat behind the front desk. She was exactly what I'd expected. Perfectly styled blonde hair, expensive athleisure wear, and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She looked to be in her mid-40s, with the kind of polished appearance that required significant daily maintenance. "Mr. Whitmore, what brings you in?" "The cones are still blocking my driveway. I need them moved." As I explained on the phone, the beautification project requires temporary driveway closure. You'll have access again on Thursday. "What beautification project? Nobody's done any work. The cones have just been sitting there." Karen's smile tightened. "The assessment is ongoing. Our contractor needs clear access." "Access to what? My driveway is fine." "Mr. Whitmore, when you purchased your home in Meadowbrook Heights, you agreed to abide by HOA decisions regarding community improvements. The board voted to assess all driveways for potential repair needs. Your cooperation is required." "I want to see the board meeting minutes where this was voted on." Her expression shifted, becoming cooler. "Those are available to homeowners upon written request. You'll need to submit a formal inquiry, and we'll respond within 30 business days as required by Arizona HOA law." 30 days? You can't block my driveway for 30 days. The driveway will be unblocked Thursday, as I've stated multiple times now. Your inability to plan accordingly is not an HOA emergency. She turned to her computer, dismissing me. "Is there anything else?" I left before I said something I'd regret. Frank had been right. Karen didn't play fair. Wednesday morning, I met with Gerald Morrison at his Scottsdale office. He'd pulled all the files related to Whitmore Concrete Solutions and the Meadowbrook Heights development. "It's all here. Gerald said, spreading documents across his desk. Your father's company poured all the foundations and driveways in Meadowbrook Heights between 2013 and 2014. The development company, Desert Vista Development Corporation, paid 80% upfront and was supposed to pay the remaining 20% upon completion. They never made that final payment. Why not? They declared bankruptcy in 2015. The development was sold to a management company, and the homes were sold to individual buyers. Your father decided not to pursue the debt because the amount wasn't worth the legal costs, but he kept the concrete ownership rights as a kind of insurance policy. And those rights are still active. According to this, they don't expire until June 2033. The agreement states that Whitmore Concrete Solutions, or its successors and assigns, maintains ownership of all concrete work performed during the initial development phase. That includes foundations, driveways, sidewalks, and the community center pad. I stared at the documents. So I own the concrete under every house in Meadowbrook Heights. Technically, yes. It's an unusual situation, but it's legally sound. Your father was very thorough with contracts. What does that mean practically? Gerald leaned back in his chair. It means you have certain rights regarding that concrete. The homeowners have easements to use it, obviously, but you maintain ownership. If the HOA wanted to modify, repair, or replace any of that concrete, they'd technically need your permission. An idea was forming in my mind. What if I revoked access? You'd need a legal reason. You can't just arbitrarily deny people access to their foundations. But if there was a dispute, if someone was interfering with your property rights, you might have grounds to restrict access until the dispute was resolved. I thought about the cones blocking my driveway. If the HOA is preventing me from accessing my property, would that constitute interference? Gerald raised an eyebrow. Possibly. What are you thinking, Travis? I'm thinking that if Karen Everhart wants to play games with cones and regulations, she should know exactly who she's playing with. Thursday arrived and the cones were still blocking my driveway despite Karen's promise. I called the HOA office. Meadowbrook Heights HOA, this is Debbie speaking, not Karen. That was something. Hi Debbie, this is Travis Whitmore. I was told the cones blocking my driveway would be removed today. Let me check. I heard keyboard clicking. Oh, I see a note here. The project has been extended through next week. You should have received an email. I didn't receive any email. This is ridiculous. I need access to my driveway. I understand your frustration, Mr. Whitmore. Let me see if I can reach someone. She put me on hold. 5 minutes later, Karen's voice came on the line. Mr. Whitmore, the timeline has been adjusted based on contractor availability. The cones will remain in place until next Friday. That's not acceptable. You said Thursday. It's Thursday. Plans change. Surely you understand that construction projects often face delays. What construction? Nothing has been done. No contractors have shown up. It's just cones sitting there. Our assessment process is thorough. We won't be rushed. Remove the cones today or there will be consequences. Karen laughed. Actually laughed. Mr. Whitmore, I don't respond well to threats. The HOA has full authority over community standards and improvements. If you continue to be difficult, we can discuss additional fines for your non-compliance and aggressive behavior. I'm not the one being aggressive. You've blocked my private property. The driveway is part of the community aesthetic and falls under HOA jurisdiction. Read your covenant. Goodbye, Mr. Whitmore. I sat in my truck, parked 2 blocks away again, and made a decision. I called Gerald back. I want to file a formal notice with the HOA. I'm revoking their access to my concrete property until they remove the cones and provide written assurance that my driveway won't be blocked again. Travis, are you sure? This is going to create a significant conflict. I'm sure. They started this. I'm going to finish it. Gerald drafted the notice that afternoon. It was a beautiful piece of legal writing, citing all the relevant property codes and contract law. The key paragraph read, pursuant to the concrete easement agreement dated March 15, 2013, and the subsequent transfer of rights through the estate of Robert Whitmore, Travis Whitmore hereby provides notice that access to all concrete structures owned by Whitmore is temporarily revoked for Meadowbrook Heights HOA and its agents, effective immediately. This revocation is due to ongoing interference with Whitmore's property rights and will remain in effect until said interference ceases and adequate assurances are provided in writing. We hand-delivered it to the HOA office on Thursday afternoon. Debbie accepted it, looking confused. What is this? Legal notice for Karen Everhart. Make sure she gets it today. My phone rang 20 minutes later. What the hell is this? Karen's pleasant phone voice was gone, replaced by pure anger. It's a legal notice. I'm revoking HOA access to my concrete. You can't own the concrete. That's absurd. Actually, I can and do. Check with your lawyer. The documents are all referenced in the notice. My father's company poured every foundation in Meadowbrook Heights, and due to non-payment by the original developer, ownership rights remained with his company. Those rights transferred to me. This is insane. You don't own people's foundations. I do. And until you remove those cones from my driveway and agree in writing not to block it again, the HOA can't perform any work on any concrete in this community. No repairs, no replacements, no modifications. Nothing. You're bluffing. Try me. Have your contractor pour new concrete for the community center expansion you've been planning. See what happens when I file an injunction. There was silence on the other end. You've been digging into our projects. I've been doing my homework. Remove the cones, Karen. She hung up. Friday morning, the cones were still there. But something else had appeared. A notice on my door from the HOA citing me for threatening behavior toward HOA personnel and interference with community improvement projects. The fine was $500. I photographed the notice and sent it to Gerald. His response was immediate. Don't pay. This is retaliation. We'll add it to the complaint. Because now we were filing a formal complaint. Gerald had connections with a real estate litigation attorney named Sarah Chen, who specialized in HOA disputes. She agreed to take my case, intrigued by the unusual property rights situation. This is wild, Sarah said when we met at her Phoenix office. I've never seen a concrete ownership case like this, but your documentation is solid. The HOA has no idea what they're walking into. What's our next step? We file a cease and desist regarding the driveway blockage, and we file a formal complaint about the retaliatory fine. Then we wait for them to make a move. In the meantime, I'll reach out to the HOA's legal counsel. They probably use one of the big firms in Phoenix. Let's see if we can resolve this before it gets ugly. It was already ugly, but I understood her point. The weekend passed quietly. The cones remained. I continued parking 2 blocks away, documenting everything with photos and notes. On Saturday, I noticed other homeowners were starting to take notice. A woman named Patricia from 3 houses down stopped me while I was walking back from my truck. Are you the guy fighting with the HOA about the cones? That's me. Good. Karen Everhart is a nightmare. She fined us $300 last year because our desert landscaping was too sparse. We live in Arizona. Sparse is the point. Others had similar stories. The HOA, specifically Karen, had been increasingly aggressive over the past 2 years. Fines for minor infractions, strict enforcement of rules that seemed arbitrary, and a general attitude of control over cooperation. Why doesn't anyone push back? I asked Frank on Sunday when he invited me over for coffee. Most people don't want the hassle. HOAs bank on that. They know homeowners will pay a $200 fine rather than spend thousands on a lawyer. Karen's been getting worse because nobody stops her. Well, I'm stopping her. Frank grinned. I had a feeling you might. Your dad was the same way. Good man, Robert. He didn't take crap from anyone. You knew my dad, sure. He supervised the concrete work when they built this place, very particular about quality. He and the development company had some heated arguments about cutting corners. Robert wouldn't budge, insisted on doing it right. This gave me a new appreciation for the documents I'd found. My father hadn't just kept the ownership rights because of money. He'd kept them because he knew the development company couldn't be trusted. Monday brought a response from the HOA's attorney, a firm called Morrison and Associates. The letter was addressed to Sarah Chen and copied to me. It claimed that my concrete ownership was legally dubious at best, and that any attempt to interfere with HOA operations would result in immediate legal action. It also demanded I pay the $500 fine within 10 days or face additional penalties. Sarah's response was swift and brutal. She sent them a complete copy of all the concrete ownership documents, along with a point-by-point breakdown of why the HOA's position was legally untenable. She also demanded the immediate removal of the cones and retraction of the fine, or we would file suit for harassment and property rights violation. Tuesday morning, I woke to find the cones gone, not just moved, but completely removed. My driveway was clear. There was no notice, no explanation, nothing. I called Sarah. They blinked, she said. Their attorney must have reviewed your documents and realized you're not bluffing. The concrete ownership is ironclad. What about the fine? Give it a day. Let's see if they retract it. Wednesday, I received a formal letter from the HOA. The fine was rescinded due to administrative review. The letter was signed by Karen Everhart, but the tone was clearly written by their attorney. Very formal, very careful, no admission of wrongdoing. We won, I asked Sarah. Round 1. But I don't think this is over. People like Karen Everhart don't back down easily. She'll look for another angle. Sarah was right. 2 weeks later, I received a notice that the HOA was calling an emergency board meeting to discuss property rights discrepancies within the community. All homeowners were invited to attend. The meeting was held on a Thursday evening at the community center. I arrived to find the room packed. Apparently, word had spread about the concrete situation, and people were curious. Karen sat at the front table with 4 other board members, all looking uncomfortable except for her. She called the meeting to order with her professional smile firmly in place. Thank you all for coming. We've called this meeting to address some concerns that have arisen regarding property ownership within Meadowbrook Heights, specifically, claims that have been made about concrete ownership. She looked directly at me. We want to assure all residents that the HOA is investigating these claims thoroughly and will take appropriate action to protect community interests. We've also been made aware that these claims are being used to interfere with necessary maintenance and improvements. I raised my hand. Point of order, I haven't interfered with anything. I revoked access because the HOA blocked my driveway without cause. Murmurs went through the crowd. Karen's smile tightened. Mr. Whitmore, you'll have a chance to speak during the public comment period. Please wait your turn. Actually, said a voice from the back, I'd like to hear more about this concrete ownership thing right now. It was Frank. Several people voiced agreement. One of the other board members, a nervous-looking man named Roger, leaned toward his microphone. Perhaps we should clarify the situation. Karen, do we have documentation showing the HOA owns the concrete? Karen shot him a look. The HOA maintains all community infrastructure. That's standard. But do we have documentation? Roger pressed. Our attorney is reviewing the matter. I stood up. I have documentation. My father's company, Whitmore Concrete Solutions, poured all the foundations and driveways in this community. Due to non-payment by the original developer, ownership rights were retained. Those rights are valid until 2033. I have the contracts, the transfer documents, and 3 attorneys who have confirmed it's legally sound. The room erupted in conversation. Karen banged her gavel. This is highly irregular. Mr. Whitmore, you're out of order. No, Karen, you're out of order. You've been bullying homeowners for years, issuing arbitrary fines, blocking driveways, and abusing your authority. You picked the wrong person to mess with. Someone started clapping. Then more people joined in. Not everyone, but enough to make Karen's face turn red. This meeting is adjourned, she snapped, standing up abruptly. You can't just adjourn, Roger said. We need to vote. I'm the president. The meeting is adjourned. Karen gathered her papers and walked out. The remaining board members looked at each other in confusion. Roger finally stood up. Okay, well, that was something. If anyone has questions about the concrete situation or any other HOA matters, we'll try to schedule a proper meeting next month. People swarmed me afterward, asking questions, sharing their own HOA horror stories, thanking me for standing up to Karen. It was overwhelming and energizing at the same time. Frank clapped me on the shoulder. You've started something here, Travis. Hope you're ready for where it goes. I wasn't sure I was ready, but I was committed. The next few weeks were relatively quiet. Karen seemed to be avoiding direct confrontation, which made me nervous. People like her didn't just give up. I was right to be nervous. In early April, I received a certified letter from the HOA. It was a notice of a special assessment, $5,000 per household for emergency concrete repairs throughout the community. The assessment was due in 30 days. I called Sarah immediately. They're trying to force your hand, she said after I read her the letter. If you block the repairs using your ownership rights, you look like you're preventing necessary maintenance. If you allow them, you've undermined your position. What if the repairs aren't actually necessary? Can you prove that? I thought about it. Maybe. Let me make some calls. I reached out to a structural engineer I'd worked with at my firm, a guy named Marcus Reynolds who owed me a favor. I explained the situation and asked if he'd be willing to assess the concrete in Meadowbrook Heights. You think the HOA is making up the need for repairs? Marcus asked. I think they're retaliating, and I need to know if there's actually a problem. Marcus agreed to do a walk through that weekend. We spent Saturday morning examining driveways, foundations, and the community center pad. He took photos, made measurements, and did some basic testing. His conclusion: this concrete is in excellent condition. There are some minor surface cracks, normal settling stuff, but nothing that requires immediate repair. Definitely nothing that justifies a $5,000 assessment per household. Would you be willing to put that in writing? Sure. I'll send you a formal report by Tuesday. Armed with Marcus's report, Sarah drafted a response to the HOA challenging the special assessment. She argued that the repairs weren't necessary, that the assessment amount was excessive, and that any work on the concrete would require my permission as the legal owner. The HOA's response was to schedule another board meeting, this time specifically to discuss the special assessment. They also hired their own engineer to assess the concrete. The dueling engineer reports became the talk of Meadowbrook Heights. Marcus's report said everything was fine. The HOA's engineer, a company called Desert Engineering Solutions, claimed there were significant structural concerns requiring immediate attention. I did some digging into Desert Engineering Solutions. They'd done several projects for Meadowbrook Heights HOA over the past 2 years, all of them expensive, all of them approved by Karen Everhart. The owner of the company was a man named Richard Everhart, Karen's husband. I brought this information to Sarah. That's a conflict of interest. That's more than a conflict of interest, Travis. That could be fraud. If she's funneling HOA money to her husband's company for unnecessary work, that's embezzlement. What do? We need more evidence. Can you find out what other projects they've done? I reached out to other homeowners, asking about past assessments and improvements. The stories that came back were troubling. Over the past 2 years, the HOA had conducted 3 major special assessments: roof repairs on the community center, parking lot resurfacing, and landscape redesign. All 3 projects had been done by companies owned or partly owned by Richard Everhart. The total amount assessed to homeowners, over $2 million. Patricia, the woman who'd been fined for sparse landscaping, had kept detailed records of all the assessments. Something felt wrong, she said when she showed me her files. The amounts never matched what the work should cost. I'm a contractor myself. I know what these things run. We were being overcharged by at least 30%. Sarah brought in a forensic accountant. What they found was stunning. Not only had the HOA been overcharged, but the work quality was often substandard. The roof repair on the community center had already started leaking again. The parking lot resurfacing was cracking. The landscape redesign had used cheap plants that died within months. This is systematic fraud, Sarah said. Karen and Richard Everhart have been using the HOA as a personal piggy bank. Do we go to the police? We need to be careful. We should present this to the HOA board first, give them a chance to address it internally. If they refuse or if Karen tries to cover it up, then we go to authorities. We scheduled a meeting with the HOA board members, excluding Karen. Roger and 2 other board members, Linda and James, agreed to meet with us at a coffee shop in Scottsdale. Sarah laid out everything we'd found. The inflated assessments, the conflict of interest, the substandard work, the pattern of overcharging. The board members' faces grew increasingly pale as she spoke. We had no idea, Linda said quietly. Karen handles all the vendor relationships. We just approve her recommendations. That's part of the problem, Sarah said. The board has a fiduciary duty to the homeowners. You can't just rubber stamp whatever the president wants. Roger rubbed his face. What do we do now? You need to suspend Karen from the board and launch an internal investigation. You need to hire an independent auditor to review all the finances. And you need to contact the Arizona Corporation Commission and possibly the Attorney General's office. She'll fight this, James said. Probably, Sarah agreed. But you have a legal obligation to the homeowners. If you don't act on this information and it comes out later, you could all be held liable. The board members agreed to call an emergency meeting for the following week. This one would be a closed session to discuss Karen's conduct. Karen, of course, found out about the meeting. 2 days before it was scheduled, I received a threatening letter from a different law firm, one representing Karen Everhart personally. It accused me of defamation, harassment, and tortious interference with HOA operations. It demanded I cease all investigative activities and pay $50,000 in damages. Sarah read the letter and laughed. This is desperation. She knows she's caught. Don't respond. Let's see how the board meeting goes. The emergency board meeting was tense. Karen showed up with her new attorney, a slick-looking guy in an expensive suit. She denied all allegations, claimed she was being targeted because of my vendetta over the concrete ownership, and threatened to sue the board if they took any action against her. The board, to their credit, didn't back down. They voted 4-1, with Karen being the only dissenting vote, to suspend her as president pending an investigation. They also voted to hire an independent auditor and to contact the Arizona Attorney General's office. Karen's response was to storm out of the meeting, shouting that they'd all regret this. The next morning, I woke to find my driveway vandalized. Someone had spray-painted obscenities across the concrete in bright red paint. My mailbox had been knocked over. My front windows were egged. I called the police and filed a report. The Maricopa County Sheriff's deputy who responded was sympathetic but realistic. Without witnesses or video, it's hard to prove who did it. Do you have any enemies in the neighborhood? I explained the HOA situation. The deputy raised his eyebrows. Yeah, that'll do it. HOA disputes can get nasty. I'd recommend installing security cameras. I took his advice and had cameras installed that afternoon. I also filed a report with Sarah, who added it to our growing file of Karen's retaliatory behavior. The auditor's report came back 3 weeks later. It was devastating for Karen. The audit found over $1.8 million in questionable payments to companies owned by Richard Everhart. The auditor also found evidence that Karen had approved payments to herself for administrative services that weren't authorized by the board or the HOA bylaws. The total amount of apparent fraud, $2.3 million. The board held another emergency meeting and voted unanimously to terminate Karen as president and remove her from the board entirely. They also voted to refer the matter to the Arizona Attorney General's office and to file a lawsuit to recover the stolen funds. Karen's response was swift and stupid. She sent an email to every homeowner in Meadowbrook Heights, claiming she was the victim of a conspiracy led by me. She said I was using my fraudulent concrete ownership claims to take over the HOA and that the board was corrupt. She urged homeowners to rise up against this tyranny. Most people ignored her. A few believed her and sent angry emails to the board and to me, but the majority of homeowners had seen enough of Karen's behavior over the years to know the truth. The Arizona Attorney General's office opened a formal investigation in late May. 2 investigators came to Meadowbrook Heights and interviewed board members, homeowners, and me. They also subpoenaed financial records from the HOA and from Richard Everhart's companies. In June, Karen and Richard Everhart were arrested and charged with multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, and theft. The arrest happened early in the morning, and several neighbors, including Frank, watched as the sheriffs led them both out in handcuffs. "Never thought I'd see the day," Frank said later. Karen acted like she was untouchable. The legal process moved slowly from there. Karen and Richard posted bail and hired a criminal defense attorney. They both pleaded not guilty, claiming they'd done nothing wrong and that the payments were all legitimate business transactions. The Attorney General's office disagreed. In August, they released a detailed report showing how the Everharts had systematically defrauded the HOA. Richard's companies had submitted inflated bids for work. Karen had approved those bids without seeking competitive quotes, and they'd split the excess profits. The scheme had been running for over 3 years. The criminal trial was scheduled for November. In the meantime, the HOA board had to figure out how to recover the stolen money and prevent future fraud. They implemented new financial controls, requiring multiple bids for any project over $5,000 and mandatory board approval for all vendor payments. Roger was elected as the new HOA president. His first act was to issue a formal apology to me for the driveway incident and the retaliatory fine. His second act was to ask if I'd be willing to donate the concrete ownership rights back to the homeowners. I thought about it carefully. Sarah advised me that I could potentially sell the rights or lease them, but that might create more problems than it solved. In the end, I agreed to transfer the ownership rights to a community trust, with the condition that the trust would be managed independently and that any decisions about concrete work would require a vote of the homeowners, not just the board. The homeowners voted overwhelmingly to accept the arrangement. The concrete ownership that had started as a weapon in my fight with Karen became a tool for greater community democracy. The trial began in November. I attended several days of it, watching as prosecutors methodically presented evidence of the Everhart's fraud. The defense tried to argue that the payments were legitimate, that the work had been necessary, but the prosecution had expert witnesses, including Marcus Reynolds, who testified that much of the work had been unnecessary or overpriced. The jury deliberated for 2 days. They found both Karen and Richard Everhart guilty on all counts. Sentencing happened in December. Karen received 5 years in prison and was ordered to pay $2.1 million in restitution. Richard received 7 years and the same restitution order. The judge was harsh in her comments, noting that they'd abused the trust of their community and stolen from their neighbors. "This is not a victimless crime," the judge said. "You took money from people who trusted you to manage their community fairly. You betrayed that trust for personal greed." The sentence reflects the severity of that betrayal. Karen cried during sentencing. Richard remained stone-faced. Both were remanded to custody immediately. The community held a meeting in January to discuss how to move forward. The restitution order meant the HOA would eventually recover most of the stolen money, but it would take time. In the meantime, the board had to rebuild trust and create new systems to prevent future fraud. I was asked to join the board, but I declined. I'd had enough of HOA politics. I just wanted to live in my house peacefully. Frank retired from his garden design business in February and started spending more time in his backyard. We'd become good friends through all of this, bonding over our shared frustration with HOA nonsense. "You know what's funny?" Frank said one afternoon while we were having coffee on his patio. "If Karen had just moved those cones when you first asked, none of this would have happened. She'd still be running the HOA, still stealing money, and nobody would have known." He was right. Karen's petty vindictiveness over the driveway had led to her downfall. If she'd been reasonable, if she'd treated me with basic respect, I never would have dug into the property records. I never would have discovered my concrete ownership. The investigation never would have started. "Sometimes karma works in funny ways," I said. By spring, Meadowbrook Heights had settled into a new normal. Roger ran the HOA competently and transparently. The board held regular open meetings. Financial reports were distributed to all homeowners monthly. Decisions about community improvements were made democratically, with input from residents. The special assessment for concrete repairs, the one that had started as Karen's retaliatory move, was canceled. Marcus had been right. The concrete didn't need significant work. The minor repairs that were actually necessary were done by a reputable contractor chosen through a competitive bidding process. The cost was a fraction of what Karen had proposed. I finally finished unpacking all my boxes in April, almost a year after moving in. The house felt like home now. The neighborhood felt like a real community, not just a collection of houses under authoritarian rule. Patricia organized a neighborhood barbecue in May. It was the first real community event that wasn't mandatory or controlled by the HOA. People actually seemed to enjoy themselves, talking and laughing without the undercurrent of fear that Karen might be watching to cite someone for a violation. "To Travis," Frank said, raising his beer. "The man who took down a tyrant with traffic cones and concrete." People laughed and raised their own drinks. I felt embarrassed but also proud. I hadn't set out to be a hero. I just wanted to park in my own driveway. But sometimes standing up to bullies leads to bigger things. The restitution payments started coming through in June. The court had seized the Everharts' assets, including their house in Meadowbrook Heights, and was liquidating everything. The money was being distributed back to homeowners based on how much they'd paid in the fraudulent assessments. I received a check for almost $8,000, representing my share of the assessments I'd paid since moving in. Others who'd been there longer received much more. Patricia got over $30,000. "I'm putting it toward my daughter's college fund," she told me. Something good coming from something bad. By summer, life in Meadowbrook Heights was genuinely pleasant. The oppressive atmosphere that Karen had created was gone. People maintained their properties because they took pride in them, not because they feared fines. Neighbors helped each other with landscaping and repairs. The community center hosted events that people actually wanted to attend. I settled into my job at the engineering firm and started dating a woman named Rachel who worked in the planning department. She thought the whole concrete ownership story was hilarious. "You're like a superhero," she said. "The Concrete Avenger. That's a terrible superhero name. All the good ones were taken." Frank's health started declining in August. He'd been dealing with heart problems for years, and they were getting worse. I helped him with his yard work and drove him to medical appointments when needed. He'd become like a surrogate grandfather to me, filling some of the void my father's death had left. "Your dad would be proud of you," Frank said one afternoon. "The way you stood up for yourself, the way you helped this community, that's the Whitmore way. You knew him better than I realized. We had coffee every week while they were building this place. He talked about you all the time. How smart you were, how you were going to be an engineer like him. He was so proud." It meant a lot to hear that. My father had died relatively young, and there was so much I'd never gotten to talk to him about as an adult. The 1-year anniversary of the cone incident arrived in September. Roger organized a community meeting to reflect on how far Meadowbrook Heights had come. He presented a report showing improved resident satisfaction, better financial management, and increased community engagement. "We went through a difficult period," Roger said, "but we came out stronger. We learned that good governance requires transparency, accountability, and respect for all residents. We learned that one person can make a difference when they stand up for what's right." He looked at me when he said that last part. The meeting ended with the board presenting me with a plaque. It read, "To Travis Whitmore with gratitude for his integrity and courage. Meadowbrook Heights Community Association, 2025. It was cheesy, but I was genuinely touched. Frank passed away in October. It was peaceful in his sleep, the way everyone hopes to go. His funeral was well attended, with neighbors sharing stories about his kindness and his beautiful garden. I spoke about how he'd been a mentor and friend during my first difficult year in Meadowbrook Heights. His daughter inherited his house and decided to keep it rather than sell. She asked if I'd help maintain the succulent garden her father had loved so much. I agreed immediately. Karen and Richard remained in prison. Their appeals were denied. The house they'd owned was sold, and the proceeds went toward restitution. By the end of the year, the HOA had recovered about 60% of the stolen money, with the rest expected to come as the Everharts' other assets were liquidated. Some homeowners wanted to press for harsher penalties, but most were satisfied with the prison sentences and the restitution. Justice had been served. In December, I got a letter from the Concrete Trust. The trust board, which consisted of elected homeowners, wanted to commission a plaque to be installed at the community center. The plaque would explain the history of the concrete in Meadowbrook Heights and honor my father's work. I approved the idea and even helped with the design. The plaque was installed in January, a beautiful bronze piece that read, "The concrete foundations and infrastructure of Meadowbrook Heights were constructed in 2013-2014 by Whitmore Concrete Solutions, under the supervision of Robert Whitmore. His commitment to quality and integrity ensured these structures would serve our community for decades." In 2024, his son Travis Whitmore donated the ownership rights to this community trust, ensuring democratic oversight of our shared infrastructure. We honor the Whitmore family's contribution to Meadowbrook Heights. The plaque unveiling was a small ceremony, attended by board members and neighbors. Rachel came with me, squeezing my hand as we looked at my father's name cast in bronze. "He'd be proud," she whispered. I thought about everything that had happened since those 3 orange cones appeared in my driveway. The frustration, the investigation, the trial, the transformation of the community. It had been a wild ride, all because I'd refused to accept an arbitrary exercise of power. My father had taught me, through his business practices and his personal ethics, that you don't let bullies win. You stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult. The concrete ownership had been his insurance policy, his way of maintaining leverage against people who might try to take advantage. He couldn't have known that it would eventually become my tool for fighting back against an abusive HOA president. But in a way, it was perfect. He'd given me exactly what I needed, when I needed it. Life in Meadowbrook Heights continued to improve through 2026. Roger served another term as president before stepping down, satisfied that he'd helped stabilize the community. A younger homeowner named Jennifer took over, bringing fresh energy and new ideas. The community implemented new programs: a tool-sharing library, neighborhood watch groups, quarterly community events. The focus shifted from enforcement and control to cooperation and mutual support. I never forgot the lessons of that first year: the importance of reading the fine print, the power of standing up for yourself, the reality that bullies often crumble when confronted with facts and determination. I also never forgot that communities are only as good as the people who participate in them. For years, Meadowbrook Heights homeowners had been passive, letting Karen Everhart run things without oversight. It took a crisis to wake people up, to make them realize that they had to be engaged and vigilant. Sometimes I drove past my driveway and thought about those 3 orange cones. Such a small thing, such a stupid, petty gesture, but it had changed everything. Karen had thought she could push around the new guy, the one who didn't know the history or the politics. She'd thought she could flex her authority, and I'd just comply like everyone else. She'd been wrong. The concrete under every house in Meadowbrook Heights stood as a reminder of that mistake. Not my concrete anymore, but the community's, held in trust and managed democratically. A symbol of how power should work. Shared, transparent, accountable. On warm evenings, I'd sit on my patio with Rachel, looking out at the neighborhood. Kids playing in yards, neighbors chatting over fences. The normal, peaceful life of a community that had learned some hard lessons, but come through stronger. Frank's succulent garden thrived under my care, each plant a living memorial to a good man who tried to warn me what I was getting into. I'd miss our coffee talks, his dry humor, his perspective from years of dealing with HOA drama. but his legacy lived on, in the garden and in the community he'd loved despite its flaws. My father's legacy lived on too, in every driveway and foundation he'd poured with care and precision. The concrete would last decades, maybe longer, serving generations of families. Quality work endures. As for me, I'd found my place in Meadowbrook Heights, not as a hero or a rebel, just as a homeowner who'd stood up for himself and accidentally helped save a community from corruption. The story of the HOA that blocked my driveway with cones became local legend. People told it at parties, embellishing the details, making me sound braver and Karen more villainous than reality. I didn't correct them. Every community needs its stories, its myths about right prevailing over wrong. The truth was simpler and more important. When someone abuses power, someone has to push back. When institutions become corrupt, people have to demand accountability. When bullies think they can get away with anything, someone has to prove them wrong. I'd been that someone, not because I was special or courageous, but because I had the tools and the stubbornness to fight back. The concrete under Meadowbrook Heights would stand for years to come, a foundation built by my father's hands and protected by his foresight. It held up houses and families and lives, doing its job quietly and reliably, just like it was supposed to, just like a community should. And that really was the point of everything. Not the drama or the trial or the victory, but the simple idea that people deserve to live in peace, in homes they own, in communities that serve them rather than control them. The 3 orange cones were long gone, recycled or thrown away somewhere. But their impact remained, rippling through the years, changing lives in ways both large and small. I'd come to Phoenix for a job and a fresh start. I'd found both, along with a community, a purpose, and a story I'd be telling for the rest of my life. Sometimes the most important battles start with the smallest provocations. Sometimes the most significant victories come from simply refusing to back down. And sometimes, just sometimes, the concrete under your feet is exactly what you need to stand your ground.